The Nerdcast Empire is on the air. It's the Nerdcast News Report for Monday, January the 27th, 2025. I'm Matt at the studio. Great to have you along with us. It's our new news program that will air twice weekly, maybe more often as news breaks, as we will be going into all of our news topics and giving you an update on what is going on across the nerdy universe. We'll be doing that Monday mornings and Friday mornings, 9 a.m. Eastern Time. And then, of course, the compiled news report you'll be able to pick up wherever you get your podcasts, usually on Friday afternoon. Joining me in studio for this first edition of the Nerdcast News Report is Mike. Mike, how's it going?
It is going. I am awake. I am here. We got some news stories on the way. We got some cool new intro music. What's up with that? We've yet to figure out how to deliver weather and traffic, but we'll get on that.
I mean, it's certainly something we could add if there's any interest in that locally. But we want to just take an opportunity to try to bring you kind of a small podcast every Monday and Friday live on Twitch and on the VOD on YouTube. To be able to just kind of encapsulate some of the breaking news that might be going on in the anime, video game, pro wrestling, whatever nerdy topics we want to get to. Obviously, we have music as well. If something breaks, we can also do that, although we do touch on that on our music weekly program, which airs on Sunday. But we're going to get to our first news topic. We're not going to waste any time, so we're going to start out with some news from Crunchyroll, and the news that at least they're claiming that there is no major data breach. The news broke last week that some username and password showed up on an X account that has since been suspended for some of the Crunchyroll premium accounts. And there was a lot of consternation as to whether there was a data breach. And of course, Crunchyroll is saying no. And, those sorts of things you don't want to lie about, that you can get you in a whole lot of trouble. But it just also feels like kind of the latest in this Crunchyroll saga that has been a pretty rough 2024 for the company, and 2025 not starting out the greatest. And, it's kind of hard to necessarily take what they say at face value just because they've not been the most forthright company in the last year.
Yeah, I hate that when I read stories like this, I tend to already start off with like a weird bias of like, okay, what are they not telling us? Like, how much of this is true? I don't want to feel that way, but when the statement comes out essentially saying, well, our systems weren't compromised, but hey, you need to make sure you're changing your password regularly and using a strong password. Given how many leaks have happened in recent history and how typically when they do, companies own up to it because they have to. This one just seems strange to me, and I kind of saw it unfold in real time. I remember having a recommended video on YouTube from Chibi Reviews talking about it, and I swear, like right after I had that recommendation, I pull up X and I see it under the For You tab, the X post in question talking about the login information. So, I saw it. That it's frightening because as these companies continue to merge and get acquired and become larger and larger, charge more money to the consumer, there's an expectation that information, whether it be customer information or employee information, that stuff has to be secure.
Yeah, it would be one thing if it was just Crunchyroll, because that's what some people will argue. Like, well, it's just your anime streaming. It's not anything important. But let's be real here. As much as you hear all these password experts saying, like, hey, don't repeat usernames and passwords, make sure you're using different ones, I would say if we found a story talking about how many people use a similar or the same password across all of their websites because you just don't want to have to remember it, I think it's a pretty high number. And because of that, when you get somebody's Crunchyroll login information, you might have also gotten their bank information.
Absolutely.
And that's where you get into the concern. And it is on these companies to make sure that they are doing everything they can to keep this information secret. And if you have a Crunchyroll account, you probably should change your password. And generally, having worked in the banking industry, we talk a lot about data security and you should change your password every 30 days. And, password managers are out there that you can basically create these unhackable, quote unquote, passwords. But at the same time, you do expect that when you use your username and password somewhere, that these companies are going to make an effort to keep them safe. And it just seems a little odd that they just like, how did somebody just get a handful of these? Like, it really makes you wonder if something has happened on the back end that maybe even Crunchyroll's not aware of at this point.
It's really hard to say. I obviously I immediately changed mine, but you want to say, yeah, it's just Crunchyroll. It's not a big deal, but Crunchyroll's Sony.
Yeah.
Like, at the end of the day, when you buy Crunchyroll, you become Crunchyroll. So Crunchyroll is Sony. So and they've had their own issues with data leaks through PlayStation Network numerous times over the past several years. So, something has to be done about this. Like, it has to get better.
Credit to CBR and Anime News Network for these articles that we're showing you live on the stream on Twitch. And yeah, I think the other issue is this is not the first issue that Crunchyroll has had, and it's not the first data leak issue. And we're going to get into that next. And we'll talk a little bit about the data leak stuff first, because 2024 saw a pretty major data leak issue involving a company that has been trying to be acquired, at least Sony's been trying to acquire, and that's Kadokawa. They ended up paying nearly $3 million in ransom to Russian-linked hackers because of hacking attempts at Kadokawa and Nico Nico earlier in 2024. And obviously, I don't think these two things are related, but you can't help but wonder when Sony and Kadokawa appear to be, at some level, getting into business at this point, that you have both of these companies that are a victim of some sort of hacking issue that, again, just gives you pause as to how secure your data is in the anime world.
Well, clearly it was Kadokawa trying to make themselves seem more appealing to Sony by paying out this ransomware and showing that they can be just as insecure as Sony is. So I can only assume that was to further their relationship along. But yeah, companies are only going to continue to get larger and larger. And certainly the customers, and of course the employees too, they can't worry about their employer just dumping all their information to random bad actors.
Yeah, and there's a good point in this Wikipedia article that kind of details the whole thing, and it is that ransomware hacks are increasing, and they are going after big companies. It used to be in the early days of the internet, they were trying to get into your individual computer and kind of go that way. And then they finally figured out, well, there's a lot more money into just going at the top and getting into these systems, which to these high-level hackers are every bit as easy as getting into one individual computer, and so much more lucrative. In a lot of cases, they can get in and out and steal millions of dollars and be on to the next thing before these companies are even aware they were ever in there in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of to my point, as far as these companies going out and acquiring more and more companies and getting more and more subsidiaries, those are all potential points of entry for hackers. I mean, you're going to have all these different legacy systems that you're going to have to keep updated to keep them from being vulnerable. And I think it's tough enough to outrun the hackers to begin with, but you're making it more difficult on yourself by giving them extra entry points that maybe when, again, you have these acquisitions, you have redundant positions, you lose people. And sometimes when you lose people, you lose the people who know best how to keep these things secure. And it's not going to get any easier.
Yeah, for sure. And like I said, we talked about it from a data standpoint, but Crunchyroll's had their issues. And, one of the big issues last year was them removing the comments. Here's a Reddit thread talking about comments being disabled on Crunchyroll's page. And obviously the company claimed that there were some hate comments on certain shows that were the reason they actually shut them down. But it also happened to coincide with some severe quality issues with their broadcasts and their subtitles. And, we talked around Christmas time about how expensive the stuff at their store is compared to Right Stuff. So it's like, there's just all these things going on with Crunchyroll. We have, of course, the David Wald issue with his mail that still really hasn't, it's clearly still in investigation.
It'll be interesting to hear the next step of that.
Yeah, so it's one of those things that, you have Crunchyroll that spent a lot of time trying to rehab the reputation of being a pirate site and becoming legitimate, and then Funimation acquiring them and taking the Crunchyroll name, and now it feels like their name's going right back into the mud just because of all these different things that are going on. And they're the giant in the industry in the United States, even to this point, even with Netflix doing more business maybe in anime financially in the year 2024. Crunchyroll's still kind of the 800-pound gorilla, if you will, of the anime industry in the United States, but the reputation is not doing so hot at the moment.
No, not at all. And I think that always will tie into other stories we have as far as piracy goes, and even like the hacking when it comes to getting login credentials. That could merely be just a way to get into those sites to basically take the content for piracy purposes. So, not that I would ever condone piracy or anything of that nature, but sometimes Crunchyroll makes it difficult to root for them. And I think anytime that you're raising prices, you're removing features for customers, you're kind of just inviting people to maybe get their anime in a less savory means.
Yeah, for sure. And obviously we'll continue to follow these stories. And if there's any more news on the email password issue with Crunchyroll, we'll certainly bring it to you on our news podcast, possibly on Wednesday with our anime episode or on Friday. And that reminds me, we'll be back on Wednesday, 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time. We will have our Anime Weekly episode. We're going to do music this week. Mike and I will each give you 5 opening, ending, insert songs that you need to check out. We've done several editions of that. You should definitely go back and check those out. But we'll do a new one on Wednesday, 8:30 a.m. Eastern. And then on Friday, we'll be back with another episode of the Nerdcast News Report, 9 a.m. Eastern. And then Sunday, of course, Music Weekly, we'll be talking about the music of January the 17th. On to a couple more news headlines today and some sad news out of Japan. The CEO of Nippon Ichi Software, President Tetsuhisa Seko, has passed away at the age of 55. Should be noted that the obituary lists him as 54, but the numbering system and the way that works in Japan is a little different. But he was 55 years old or he actually was 54, but they list 55 in the obit, I believe is how it was set. But Nippon Ichi Software is certainly a software company. You have spent plenty of time playing their games. The Disgaea franchise specifically is maybe one of their biggest titles, but certainly sad news to hear of his passing.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess he joined the company back in 2005, having prior worked for SNK and Toshin Company. In the early 2000s, I stumbled into a game, La Pucelle Tactics, which led me then to the Disgaea series. I mean, this is probably 2001, 2002-ish, if I had to guess, maybe a little later. But that company has had so many games and has shaped so much of my video game fandom in the last 20 years or so. Obviously, you have the Disgaea series. You have spin-off games from that, like Phantom Brave and Makai Kingdom. Not even counting all the games that have been brought west that were licensed by NIS America, like the Ys series, Danganronpa, Legend of Heroes series, which is now seemingly becoming bigger and bigger. When you consider my gaming prior was predominantly, Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy games. I played other things, but those were kind of the big two. And NIS kind of showed up and usurped that position where now every next game they release is always on my radar. So just sad to hear. I mean, at 54 years old, certainly too young to be leaving, but hope, thoughts and prayers obviously to the family.
Yeah, for sure. And Chairman Koichi Kitazumi will act to fill the vacant president's spot, but it doesn't appear they'll be adding anybody to their board after his passing. So, yeah, our thoughts certainly with his family and with the company, obviously, at this difficult time. One other main news story for today's edition, and it is more talk about piracy. The news coming, CBR's got a really good story on it, that the One Piece publisher is targeting 19 piracy sites worth 560 million views in a major new subpoena request. These are piracy sites, and you can see the actual listing here. Obviously, these sites probably aren't going to be up for very long, but they have a full list of these sites, and it kind of talks a little bit about the data numbers. You can kind of see there. One of them pulling 124.9 million visits in the month of December. And, we've had a few stories like this over the past couple of months where they're starting to go after these websites again, kind of en masse to try to cut some of the piracy down. We usually think of it in the anime world, but it is also an issue in the manga world as well. And clearly, One Piece probably has plenty of money to go after these companies, but it'll be interesting to see whether they're actually able to get these companies pulled down.
Yeah, absolutely. And it takes a One Piece or to relate this back to music, it takes a Metallica or a Dr. Dre to say, hey, this is wrong. This can't continue. I think we have a problem right now where we've devalued our entertainment to the degree where people don't see a big difference between paying a monthly subscription for something and not paying at all. Not saying that we should go back to the days of overpriced manga and anime by any means, but it's become so much more affordable now. And unfortunately with that, I think there's that sense of, well, it's not like it's that expensive. What's it matter if I just don't pay for it at all? And it'll be interesting in the future to see how the discourse goes between these creators and web hosting services and content delivery networks. Like, where does the liability lie as far as what you're allowing to run through your servers or whatever? It's wild, but I mean, like everything else, the battle's never going to end.
And, they even mentioned in this article from CBR.com that, Shueisha filed a subpoena request against Google, Visa, and PayPal last year. So, as we've talked about, a lot of times these websites are hosted in sketchy places in the world or places that, at the very least, don't necessarily have extradition rights to Japan or the United States. So, they're able to operate for quite a while, really, without anybody being able to get to them. So these companies are now going to go up the food chain and say, okay, well, if I can't get to you directly, I'm going to get to your web hosting company, or I'm going to get to whatever company you're using to process payments or wherever it may be. They're going to go to the companies that they can actually get their hands on and say, okay, like, I know that you're not necessarily condoning what's going on, but you're allowing these companies to do business. You're going to have to stop this, or we're going to take you to court in order to try to, work our way down to these illegal sites that we're trying to get off the internet.
Yeah, and like in this story, Cloudflare, the content delivery network, stated that they do provide injured parties and trusted partners with the IP addresses and names of the host ISP for infringing websites, but the owners of those copyrights still don't think that's enough, that they think that more of the onus should be on them to get these things removed. So it'll be interesting to see how all this plays out.
Yeah, it's going to be very fascinating. I think it's a fascinating story, and it's just this ongoing battle of these companies who are charging more for their services. Like, we're going to talk about a story coming up about Netflix raising their prices. So some of the legal stuff is getting more expensive, and you have the illegal stuff finding new ways to get out there, and companies trying to chase around these companies to shut them down so they can charge more. It's an interesting shell game that's going on in all of media, not just the anime world, but video games, manga, live action TV. It's going to be interesting to see how it continues to go.
It kind of makes you long for the old days when this was, for the most part, just a discussion about music, and you had Napster and you had IRC, and you didn't feel like the Hydra had that many heads yet, but now it's overwhelming.
It is, for sure, and it's really, they try to keep up with it, but it's almost impossible. We're going to wrap up our news podcast every Monday and Friday with something we're going to call the Empire Express. It's an homage to, pardon the interruptions, Big Finish. I will take the odds. Mike will take the evens. We'll run through some quick hitter news stories and give a couple comments, and that's how we will wrap up our news podcast every week. Ready to go, Mike?
Let's do it.
All right, Netflix announced an increase to their subscription prices, raising between $1 and $2.50 a month. The highest tier is up to $24.99 a month. Is this the WWE effect?
Quite possibly, and you have to wonder, as they expand their live event offerings in the future, will we see more price increases each time around? A Japanese man was arrested for selling fake One Piece game cards. The report said he sold cards worth more than $55,000. Looking for a new career?
Absolutely. If somebody wants to get me involved in the fake card market, I can pull in that kind of money. It's insane how much money he's making off of fake cards. On Saturday night's main event, Gunther defended his world title, beating Jey Uso. Is that the right call?
Yeah, absolutely. Jey Uso's already over as it is, and I think, honestly, the best way for him to win a title would be via a cash-in at Money in the Bank. I think that's going to give you the biggest bang for your buck, but we'll see how that goes. Last week, NXT on the CW drew 812,000 viewers. Does it reach 1 million by 2025?
It could. I think as they continue to hotshot, I would not be shocked to see a John Cena appearance on NXT in 2025. If that happens, I definitely think they get to 1 million on a regular episode. Finally, a rare sports question. The Super Bowl is set. Do you have the Eagles or the Chiefs?
My heart says Eagles, but the Chiefs to me are peak Roman Reigns. I can't bet against them.
I think a lot of people are rooting for the meteor in that case between the Eagles and the Chiefs. But that is going to wrap up our news podcast for this Monday. The Nerdcast News Report now wrapped up. You are all caught up getting into your week with the latest news and notes from the Nerdcast Empire. Again, Wednesday, we've got the anime podcast coming back. That will be coming up at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time, our Anime Weekly on Wednesday. Friday, another edition of the Nerdcast News Report at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. And then, of course, on Sunday, another episode of Music Weekly, where we will take a look at the music of January the 17th. Big thanks to everyone for catching up with us for the Nerdcast News Report. For Mike and the entire crew, I'm Matt saying so long. Don't forget to join the Empire, the Nerdcast Empire.